Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola. I'm the managing editor for Shadowproof.com, also the curator for the dissenter.org. And welcome to this stream. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to look at the interview that took place with Roger Waters, and it was hosted by Michael Smerconish, who has a Saturday morning show, and then the CNN producers cut this interview together, and it was about 6 to 7 minutes that aired Saturday morning. It all was shared, and then there was an uncut interview that was posted about 24 hours later, just about 24 hours later. We got this full, nearly half-hour interview that was posted. And my interest in this is not only as somebody who covers dissent, but also as someone who is interested in the way the mass media functions. But I'm a Pink Floyd fan as well. I'm a fan of Roger Waters. I'll declare my bias openly. You can find on this channel about a 50-minute video that I did on the revolutionary nature of this concert experience that Roger put together with his band and the people who develop the video images that appear on screen during the show, the people who worked on the messaging and content for the show. There's a strong activism to Roger Waters' concert tour that This Is Not a Drill, which is ongoing right now in North America. And so that's what we'll be discussing. But before we get to the interview, it's important that I play for you a song. It's important that I play for you, and it's going to be, so I can get around any copyright claims, my own crude cell phone video footage of the Bravery of Being Out of Range. The reason I'm going to play the full performance of Bravery of Being Out of Range before getting to the deconstruction and the discussion and showing you what CNN was doing here to essentially undermine the message of Roger Waters' show. I'm going to show you this because Roger was asked a question about why he singled out Joe Biden as a war criminal. And I think it's important for you to know that, in my view, CNN was being deceptive because every single president was called out for being a war criminal. And the song that you hear is one that Roger wrote in relation to the Gulf War back in would have been around 1990, 1991. And so it refers to politicians and how easy it is for them to make war because they're not in the line of fire. And they don't have to worry about the carnage and experiencing it themselves. And he likened it to a video game. We could apply this song today and many of its lyrics, indeed I did, to drone warfare and the ease in which Barack Obama was able to wage drone warfare, pioneer this assassination complex to go after people around the world. So without talking any further, here's this song that Roger performed. Pull this up for you.
Catastrophe. Our views on foreign affairs will cause war. Once you begin a great movement, there's no telling where it'll end. We meant to change a nation, and instead, we changed the world.
To squeeze out you cook on a cause, you're better right. You're old, but you still like it. How about change? You're gone. suitcase behind your workings to show you're definitely a comfort friend. Going upstage in the end by the blues machine. Does the wind love you? Oh man, what the hell are you gonna give me? Oh Tom, who you gonna give me? Looked over Jordan, what did I see? Saw a U.S. Marine in a private jet, swabbing your poles, lay under your arms, looked in the eyes of the Union, lay on the federal barricades. Throw the range flying over the hill, so the frontline boys up in their fields. Take the look, they find on that desert stage, the bravery of being out of range. Yeah, the question is fast. Oh man, what the hell are you gonna give next? Oh Tom, who you gonna give next? It's the same old tune, no closer to peace than the man in the moon. The president's still just as crazy as the moon, still picking fights and some violence is the I'm still falling out of the sky, I'm still playing this American game. The still sleeps and so far away. The bars are still coming. Home on the street, and nothing is real. The bravery, get out of the way. Stop the bravery, get out of the way. It saves the train with the bravery, get out of the way. There's no fucking insane. Bravery, get out of the way. Bravery, get out of the way.
Two years later, another year on the sun, pretty much the same cast. At the big opening meeting, we all got together, and all of a sudden, just for a moment, I saw that everyone was just sitting there looking at me. And then one of them broke the silence. Tell us about the American miracle, he said.
Hey, bartender, Over here, two more sheets and two more pills. Sir, turn up the TV sound. The war started on the ground. Just love those faces, guided bombs. They're really great for running. You're hitting the target, winning the game. From Mars, 3,000 miles away. 3,000 miles away. You play the game with the bravery of being out of the way.
So that's the song. That's the song that calls out Joe Biden and that Michael Smerconish and CNN object to the way in which Roger singled out. But Biden is part of a system. He's a president. He's a figure who is ruling an empire. He's ruling the U.S. empire. And as you can tell from the bravery of being out of range, Roger calls out Joe Biden in the context of presidents that have come after Ronald Reagan. He didn't have to start there, but a lot of what defines our world can be traced back to Ronald Reagan. And I think he is affected by the dirty wars that were waged by Ronald Reagan and how the President Bill Clinton, Bush, second Bush, and everyone on down the line has continued that dirty war policy ever since Ronald Reagan. And so for Michael Smerconish to take issue with Joe Biden being called out in the show and for CNN to take issue, it's obviously about framing dissent. And so I'm here to highlight parts of this interview because after I saw the show, This Is Not a Drill, I went to a book fair and I picked up, I was lucky enough to find a copy of this book by Jules Boykoff that came out in 2007. And you probably can't read the title. It's called Beyond Bullets, The Suppression of Dissent in the United States. It's 15 years old. But as I was reading through it and thinking about this interview almost nearly at the same time, what it laid out for me is that there is a technique going on here on the part of the CNN producers. I'm not sure how much Michael Smerconish is in on it, although he is to some extent, and I'll be showing that. But there is a policing of Roger Waters because they are afraid of what he's doing with masses of people. There are tens of thousands of people coming to see Roger every night in North America. And what he is doing is challenging that U.S. imperial desire, those imperial ambitions to rule the world, to control what China is able to do to influence its region, to control what Russia is able to do to assert itself, to defend NATO, and also to maybe take NATO from being just a European alliance that counters Russia, but also to maybe even expand it, to have some role to play in the Pacific in challenging China. We've heard talk over the last week about Taiwan getting some kind of status in NATO, potentially welcoming it into an international organization. And the crux of Roger's show is that there are all these threats that are being fueled by the United States, and that we need to recognize what is happening and do something to curtail those impacts of our quest for imperial dominance. Otherwise, humanity isn't going to be long for this world. We're not going to last much longer. And so as you think about this interview, there are things that stood out from what Boykoff has to write. First off, he points out that the effort to frame dissent is easily identifiable It has a lens that refracts the news and will shape public opinion. And the frame, I'm going to get a little bit didactic and academic here, but some of you will appreciate it. Others will wish that I could find you another clip of Roger Waters. He defines a frame as an interpretive schemata that simplifies and condenses the world out there by selectively punctuating and encoding objects, situations, events, experiences, and um, and sequences of actions within one's present or past environment. So essentially, as he lays out in the setup to going on to explore suppression of dissent in the U.S., he says a dissident can be portrayed as a committed humanitarian who holds uh, grounded, well thought out positions based on compassion and kindness, and who takes democracy seriously. And that's personally how I view Roger, someone who, when you engage with him and talk about these human rights issues, he cares about this deeply. He's got a commitment to it, and there's a through line in his music that comes from that compassion and love for other human beings. But what CNN is capable of doing is taking a dissident like Roger and his music and portraying him as an uninformed rabble rouser with a penchant for, let's say, cheap thrills, troublemaking, that kind of a thing, and that maybe he's just doing this to stir up animosity, and that he wants to be this kind of strident musician to call attention to himself. So CNN comes in, and when they interview a musician with the kind of power, with the kind of, I guess, legendary history in his career, they know that people are going to hear what he has to say and it will resonate. And so off the bat, the objective is to strip someone like Roger of credibility and make them appear irresponsibly, like they're irresponsible, like they're fringe-like. They want them to see them as perhaps ludicrous in the way they are expressing their worldview, and there will be deprecatory themes. The way that they describe these dissidents will be about ridiculing them. It will be about showing you that they should not occupy this space, the same space that pundits are allowed to occupy. It will be about condemning them. It'll be about public scolding. What you see in this interview is Smerconish scolding, even as a Pink Floyd fan who puts this together. And this is not the first time he's interviewed Roger. They seem to have a little bit of respect for each other. He interviewed Roger when he did the Us versus Them tour in 2017 during the first year of Donald Trump's presidency. But the effect here, when Roger veers into these issues that are considered third rail to the U.S. empire, what the goal is of Smerconish is to sit there and be a cop and to police what Roger is saying about these global issues and to get him back in line. And to the extent that he would not get back in line, then the takeaway for the audience is supposed to be that this is somebody who deserves to be scolded, deserves to be condemned, excoriated, and ridiculed for his views. And you should be allowed to tell him to get back to playing the music. In the same way that we see people get upset at athletes who express themselves in sports, on politics, the same can be said for entertainers, including musicians. You're supposed to feel compelled to say to Roger, why don't you just play the Pink Floyd hits and shut the fuck up? And that is the goal. That is what they are doing. So I'm going to play these clips that I have queued up here for you. We'll start with this one that gets into where Roger spoke about Ukraine. And I have another clip queued up for another section of the interview. And both of these clips that I'm showing are intended to show the way in which it was edited And it isn't so much that CNN was being deceptive, but that in the way that they edited this interview, it was removing a context and making it seem like Roger was much more defensive and supportive of the Russia position than he was just talking about our place in the world and how we need to be mindful of these wars that are destabilizing to everyone all around us.
Are you an equal opportunity offender on this tour? Here's why I ask. I remember the last tour. Of course, I came and watched. Very much, about Trump. And in the current show, you've got a montage of war criminals, according to you, and a picture apparently of President Biden on the screen, and it says, "Just getting started." What's that all about?
President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, the president, to negotiate, obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing?
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party
Russians.
that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed. Are you an equal opportunity offender on this tour? Here's why I ask. I remember the last tour. Of course, I came and watched. Very much, about Trump. And in the current show, you've got a montage of war criminals, according to you, and a picture apparently of President Biden on the screen, and it says, "Just getting started." What's that all about?
President Joe Biden?
Yeah.
Well, he's fueling the fire in the Ukraine for a start. That is a huge crime. Why won't the United States of America encourage Zelensky, or whatever his name is, the president, to negotiate and to explain why, when he stood on the platform of ratifying the Minsk agreements, which he did when he was elected by 73% of the Ukrainian population that was left able to vote. After that, somebody either whispered in his ear or he completely changed his mind about making peace in the Donbass and about solidifying the Minsk agreements and making peace with their Russian neighbors and obviating the need for this horrendous war that's killing.
You're blaming.
We don't know how many Ukrainians.
But you're blaming the party
Russians.
that got invaded. Come on, you've got it reversed.
Yeah, so you could see what happened there. They made it look like Michael Smerconish was cutting in to redirect Roger so that he was less pro-Russia and to challenge him on that. Well, and what Roger was really saying was, let's look at what led to the moment of conflict and let's reflect on the failure of enforcing these Minsk agreements. And let's look at how the US did not want those Minsk agreements to be enforced, and that was not a status quo that was supported by the United States, and what that might mean for us. And I think in particular, as somebody who is a part of the Western world, that's the responsibility that he has, but that's also the responsibility that I have. I'm far more interested in holding accountable the people who run the US and the people who are Western world leaders who are constantly provoking and engaged in this kind of conduct. And in the interview, which I'm not going to play, you can go watch, but as he continues, he does discuss the encirclement of NATO, the pushing right up to the Russian border, doing what we had said we would not do in agreements with Gorbachev. And he goes on to speak in the Uncut interview to Smerconish about the Mersheimer lecture that has probably has a couple million views now at this point. That went viral at the start of the war in Ukraine. And so that open-endedness becomes something that Smerconish delineates is unquestionable. You are not allowed to have a conversation about it. There's a little bit more to say along this, but the next clip that I have to get to shows you another cut that I think at minimum is misleading. But again, it also puts this aura around Roger of being pro-Russian, and it mistakes the fact that he cares about the humanity of the Ukrainians and the Russians equally. That they are pawns, they are being sacrificed, and then there's also the inflicting of collective punishment that is going on to Russians. And then between those two countries, there's the ripple effects that are affecting all human beings throughout our world.
You know, any war, when did it start? What you need to do is look at the history, and you can say, well, it started on this day. You could say it started in 2008. Okay, it's basic. This war is basically about the action and reaction of NATO pushing right up to the Russian border, which they promised they wouldn't do when Gorbachev negotiated the withdrawal of the USSR from the whole of Eastern Europe.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people.
Either you subscribed to the 30 articles of that declaration, or you don't. You cannot cherry pick. You can't have it. You can't have it your own way. You have to say either this is about all of us, all our brothers and sisters, irrespective of ethnicity or religion or nationality, or it isn't. But you can't cherry pick. You can't say, well, we deserve human rights, but they don't. That is called being supremacist. And there's religious supremacy and you know, skin color based supremacy and political supremacy and this and that. Well, so that's a very important document, partly, as we know, written by Eleanor Roosevelt, I believe, had a huge amount to do with the wording of that declaration from 1948. I can't remember where I got started on this, but it's a very small platform. So the guy who wrote that article in the Jewish Independent, whatever paper,
Yep.
Thank you, sir, for
The forward.
being the forward, for saying that about the show. And I'm really glad to hear that you feel that way. But I will stand on that platform until the day I die. And if I live to be the age of Methuselah, I would still be standing on 1948 Paris. And I stand on that platform with all my brothers and sisters all over the world, irrespective of all the things that I've said. And there are billions of them in the South, in the poor world, in the third world, who have been trampled on for the last 500 years, since we Europeans started spreading over the world and trying to steal everything from them, which is what we've been doing, including here in the United States, I believe. This is not taught in your schools, obviously.
When you say this, then I have to say, what about our role as liberators? You of all people.
It's psychosis to have that kind of response. Roger Waters is laying out a 500-year history. He's looking at human rights globally, the subjugation of people in the global South. He's examining this war in Ukraine in the context of many, many eras of power and efforts to dominate the world. And the key message, first and foremost, the biggest thing that Roger is trying to convey in his This Is Not a Drill show isn't on the issues. It's on the fallacy that any one country can ever rule the world and control it. And that we must get away from this idea that there can be a unipolar world. There can't be a world that is dominated by China singularly. There couldn't be a world singularly dominated by Russia. And there shouldn't be, and there can't be, a world dominated by the United States. One country cannot run the world. And that has been proven time and time again. And it's something that people like Smerconish and others at CNN can't accept. They can't accept. They're not rooted in realism, foreign policy realism. They're not willing to acknowledge what Roger is saying, which is a very basic idea that if you act in a certain manner, other countries with power are going to react to the way you take action. So it's like you impose sanctions on Russia. Okay, European countries are not going to get access to gas that they need for fueling their communities, for providing energy to their people that they need for their homes and their businesses, etc. If you go to an African country, this happened in the last week. It's right in there. It's right along the lines of what Roger is talking about and trying to communicate to Smerconish, but you can't get through that thick skull of his that only is capable of connecting with Roger on the level of liner notes in Pink Floyd's music. So he won't listen as Roger speaks about the impact to continents like South America and Africa as a result of U.S. and European actions over the last 500 to 1,000 years. And in this last week, we saw a U.S. diplomat go to one of the African countries and essentially say that you should not be importing or accepting anything from Russia other than grain. We'll let you have grain. You could have grain. And they resent that, the idea that they're not allowed to engage in this trade because they need it. They're starving. Their people are hungry. They do not have the kinds of resources and wealth that the United States does. And they need to be able to get this. And if they can get it cheaper than they can from the US or other parts of the West, then they're going to do it. They're going to get it from Russia or they're going to get it from China. And the gall of anyone to go in there and tell them where they can't get the basic goods that they need to survive. It's just, it's absolutely mind-blowing. But it can't last. We are withering in our ability to assert our dominance over, and that is a message of what Roger is trying to say that is not listened to by Smerconish. So we could sit here and we can debate what's happening in Ukraine. We could sit here and we can debate the history of Taiwan and China. And I know there was a backlash to Roger saying that Taiwan is a part of China and has been that way since 1948. We can get into this, but that's not the point. The reason why that becomes a part of the interview out of 30 minutes of interviewing Roger is because those are third rail issues. Those are taboo. Those are thoughts that are not supposed to be had. And what are they doing? They're doing exactly what Roger talks about in his show. He talks about controlling the narrative. Let me put this up on the screen for you. He talks about in the interview, he talks about all of these issues and the reaction that we're seeing from Smerconish. It's intended to place these guardrails and play gatekeeper. And what is the point? Why are we doing this? Because as he puts up in his show, when you're watching This Is Not a Drill, rule the narrative, control the world. And then he'll ask during, and this is when he's performing another brick in the wall, but how do we keep control? Grease the wheels of public consent. And so I've got one more clip here, and it's of Smerconish. And I want people to listen to how he sets up the interview and what he says the stated goal is for it. And I want you to listen to what he says about why he did this and what he says to his Sirius XM listeners. He has a Sirius XM radio show, and it's very telling, very revealing that this is not just about being a fan of Pink Floyd. If it was, in the 7 minutes, we would have something about the music. If it was, we would hear Roger criticize and condemn the ticket sellers and how it has become too expensive for people to go to concerts. You didn't hear that in the 7 minutes. We would hear him talk a little bit about the music. Instead, the 7 minutes was all about, well, he'll get into it. It's about the idea that people who are not receptive to his messages should be put on notice, basically, to not be disruptive during his show for other people if they don't like what he has to say about these human rights issues. And then they got into the issues around Ukraine, and Taiwan and China came up in the interview as well. And so all of that became cut together as the CNN segment. And they're really stripped away was a lot of, I think, what makes Roger someone who people have deep admiration and respect for as a musician. So here's what Smerconish had to tell his audience.
On Pink Floyd co-founder Roger Waters' current solo tour, instead of turning down the politics, he's amping them up to 11. Last time out, he preached against Donald Trump and in favor of Palestine. This tour, twice delayed by COVID and ominously titled "This Is Not a Drill," includes references to police murdering black men, semi-automatic weapons and abortion, and giant video screens in the shape of a cross. Waters' guitarist Jonathan Wilson has explained why Waters' tour differs from those of fellow older classic rockers. Quote, "Even the Stones or members of the Beatles, it's more of a trip down memory lane than it is a current show. The activism, that's sort of the key to the whole thing." As a longtime fan of Waters' music who doesn't always agree with his messaging, I wanted to ask him about his mix of performing and preaching. Things got a bit animated.
I'm really excited about this because I saw the final cut, pun intended, for those who know, last night. I sat down with Pink Floyd co-founder, chief lyricist, solo artist Roger Waters. I interviewed him in Philadelphia because he's in Philadelphia for 2 nights of concerts at the Wells Fargo Center. Is that what they call it now? So really interesting because he is a musical genius, and he's like a political madman. And we always have spirited conversations, and wait until you see this. On radio yesterday, I played some of the audio excerpts, but on television today, you're going to see us disagree about Russia, Ukraine, China, the U.S. legacy in World War II, in the context of talking about him really wielding a soapbox in this current concert tour. In other words, it's not like he occasionally gets himself in hot water because he says something that red states find offensive. No. He wears it on his sleeve, and he views his concerts as an opportunity not only to play his music, which is fabulous, but also to advance his, political perspective. And he may be wrong in your opinion, but he's got some deep-seated beliefs, and he's consistent. One of the things that comes out, he begins the concert by making an announcement and saying, if you're one of those people who says that you love Pink Floyd's music, but you can't stand Roger's politics, then, get the F out. And then he starts the show. So you know what you're getting. And it's a great, the production values on the interview, hat tip to creative outfit. That would be PJ, Randy and company who assist me with YouTube. They recorded it and they did a sensational job. The setting makes it worthwhile in and of itself. So Roger Waters and yours truly, you'll watch it on CNN today. We think we'll probably release the full interview, which is like 25 minutes long, at some point soon as well.
He calls him a political madman. A political madman. Like someone who makes music and talks to the people about political issues are responsible for causing great harm to those around the world, that he's hurting and inflicting punishment on vulnerable people. Like somehow Roger Waters speaking out about what he thinks led to the conflict and the war in Ukraine is going to be the reason why Ukraine isn't able to triumph over Russia, or that's going to be the thing that makes the difference when it comes to Taiwan trying to maintain its independence against China. And it's ridiculous. It's just fucking ridiculous. And you hear him speak there about the introduction that Roger gives. He says to people at the beginning of his show, and this has gone around, it's been viral, and you might have heard it by now, that he lets people know that if you're one of those people who love Pink Floyd but don't like Roger's politics, and I think Smerconish has at least one foot in this camp, and he's probably keeping the other foot out so he can still get Roger to return his calls for future interviews. But I believe that he's in this grouping, and Roger says that those people can fuck off to the bar because he doesn't want them shouting at his show and trying to bring it to a halt because they don't like the messages that they are hearing from the stage. And those messages, just to be clear with everybody, are on indigenous rights, are on police murdering Black people throughout the US and around the world. It's the security forces that are terrorizing communities in the US, but in other parts like the Middle East, South America. He names some of the people who were murdered in countries in South America. And so it's a global show. It's concerned about indigenous rights in the US, the Dakota Access Pipeline, which I think is even more important now that we just saw legislation passed in the Senate that allows for maintaining and expanding oil and gas drilling in the US. And then Roger speaks about nuclear holocaust. He's talking about who's the political madman. He's telling Roger that he's a political madman in the intro. The madmen are the people who are saber rattling and engaged in provocative acts with China and who continue to keep this conflict going in the Ukraine. I think there's like $1 billion weapons package coming in this month that is on the table for Ukraine. Meanwhile, we're getting headlines about nuclear reactors being in the middle of battles and exposed, and we could see another Chernobyl-like event at any moment. And then, not to mention, Russia has nukes, the U.S. has nukes. The lack of communication, something of that nature, could really lead to, you take your pick. Either you like the serious film version of it with failsafe, which is more like a play, or you like the satire. I think I prefer the satire just because I like a little more laughs. I like a little laughs with the apocalyptic vision, the sense that there will be doom. So I prefer Dr. Strangelove over Failsafe. But either of those films communicate the future possibility if we do not have more common sense, if we do not recognize what is going on around us, and if we do not ignore the messages that are being fed to us by CNN about these deemed adversaries of the United States that we're supposed to be ready to arm countries in and around them to the teeth so that they can fight, when I don't believe that the people here in the U.S. are willing to be part of that kind of a bloody battle that can last 5 to 10 years, no matter where you're looking at and in what region. I have to go back and say Smerconish called the video screens that are up there, he called that a cross. It's a monolith. It's a video monolith that was developed by his team. It's quite impressive. It starts on the floor, and then we see Comfortably Numb open the show. And the Comfortably Numb is for people like Smerconish. It's for the producers at CNN. It's for the people who are the men who are creating the spin for the politicians and the elites. But it's more than anything directed at us. It's directed at the people who populate these cities that are being hollowed out by capitalism. And it's to communicate to us that we might want to put down our phones. We might want to think about some of the existential threats that we're being faced with and do something more, demand something more, fight back, resist, whatever, instead of accepting this. So in that case, Smerconish, it's kind of interesting when you think of his position. He's a fan of Pink Floyd. He likes talking with Roger about these issues. But when Roger talks about us versus them, it's really a question that I think Michael Smerconish should ask himself. Is he us or is he them? I think after the interview was put in the can and given to the CNN producers and it was chopped up and then he did the intro, he is them. I think when he's talking to Roger and he's being friendly and he's trying to have a connection, a human connection with Roger, he's getting close to us, but he's afraid to be us. And you'll see here. So here, I have a couple more things that I can add about this before I wrap this all up, but I got one more quick clip for you. And I thank you for tuning in to all of this that I put together here. But I have one more clip that just shows you that he's got this kind of censor. Yeah, Smerconish has a censor. All these people who work at these news networks or these prestige media organizations. That's a word that Boykov included in his book. I think I'm going to use it. I like it a lot better than legacy media organizations. Prestige media organizations. They are gatekeepers and they can function like that and delineate what is acceptable. And then I think they can also go beyond just being gatekeepers to actually behaving like cops, civility police. That's happening in the interview. When you watch him talk, when he talks about the message that opens his show and telling people to fuck off, it's very much civility policing and saying that that's rude and crude. These fans that are coming to your show who want to see you, should you be telling them that? But I think it's establishing from the beginning of the show that he's going to be talking about things that are beyond the pale for a lot of people, including Smerconish. So watch this, and I think you'll get what I'm trying to convey here.
After the illegal USA-inspired coup in 2014 that put out the democratically elected government of the Ukraine, the Russians were completely clear about how they felt about that.
You're giving them a pass. I have to say it. I mean, if I don't call you out on this, I'd be disappointed later to watch the tape.
Do you know the tape is only going to be 4 minutes long when
I hope this is in it.
And you already told me that. So this is just us having a chat over a beer. This doesn't affect anything.
This doesn't affect anything. I just love that. It doesn't. Smerconish isn't going to do anything more than make sure that he's kept Roger on script. But it isn't going to change whether the U.S. succeeds in its objectives. It's not going to affect the outcome of the war in Ukraine. It's not going to affect what happens between the U.S. and China. This is child's play on the part of Smerconish to think that calling out Roger is anything that has any redeeming value, like it's a community service. And he does it because he's uncomfortable, because he knows that he's hearing something that the people around him at CNN would never say. And he doesn't want the interview to end and then people see it. And then in, I don't know, let's say the break room, the green room, maybe when he's developing his show and he's at the studio, someone stops him in the hall and says, Smerconish, I'm really a little upset and disappointed at you. You didn't call Roger out when he was talking about Ukraine. You didn't tell him that you're saying the Kremlin line. You didn't accuse him of that. You didn't say he was being a Putinist. And think you I think you're slipping. I think you're slipping a little bit when it comes to your work here at CNN. You let your fandom of the Floyd get in your way, and you should have been a little more aggressive in calling out Roger Waters, which is it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that you need to be so concerned about this. But he says it is he knows it going into the interview. He's concerned about how Roger is using a soapbox. And so he becomes a cop. He's a cop. In that interview, talking to Roger, every time an issue comes up that the media won't tell you the truth about and cover fully, he is ready there with his baton to reach out and smack Roger across the knee and stop him and challenge what he's trying to say rather than engaging with the ideas that are being shared. He talks a lot in the Uncut video about how he reads a lot and he knows about it and he understands what Mearsheimer is saying in that video, but not once during that interview is he comfortable talking about those topics that are raised with Mearsheimer. Not once is he willing to talk with Roger about what is being said in a manner that is reasonable and like you would do at the bar. At the bar, the concept that is a part of Roger's This Is Not a Drill show. If you go to it, you hear Roger perform a new song that has never been done before except on his tour that he wrote while the pandemic had the world shut down. And he talks about the bar. It's a long song, and it was actually inspired by a side of one of the sides in the Blonde on Blonde album that Bob Dylan put out, the Sad-Eyed Lady of the Lowlands. So there's that song, and then there's also this thing of the bar, and he's got this music that I think goes to this community and these different things that are spaces, these different places that are spaces in which we get to come together and connect. And in the arena, when you're there, Roger is in the round, he's in the middle of the arena, and the audience is able to create this connection with him. And I think he so wants a person like Michael Smerconish to be willing to make that connection with him, except he is resistant to it. And when all is said and done, oh, one more quick thing. You'll notice that he doesn't mention Julian Assange during this Uncut interview. And obviously it's not in the final segment that aired on CNN. And Smerconish never challenges Roger on Julian Assange. But also I'll notice that Roger did not raise it. So I think maybe he got pulled down the road and was willing to just go where Smerconish went. But it would have been nice to hear about Julian Assange because that is a big part of Roger's show. And there are people from the Assange Defense Committee and activists who are Assange supporters who are tabling at every single concert event. So certainly if Smerconish went to a show, and I believe he did, he would have seen that table and he would have seen the Free Julian Assange words up on the video screen during a part of the concert. But he leaves that out. I think we know why Smerconish leaves that out and CNN leaves that out because it implicates them. And so that's what is really at the core of all of this. The controlling of a dissident musician, somebody who's willing to find the truth, seek the truth, bring that into the music that he is composing, even today, to go beyond not just being this act that tours the world and plays their hits from the 70s and 1980s, from a long, long time ago, playing to people's nostalgia, but also freshening that music, finding something new about that music, reworking it. Comfortably Numb was recorded and put out on an album in 1979. But if you listen to it in his show, it's fresh. And it sounds like something that speaks to 2022. You wouldn't know that it was written in 1979 because the way that he reworked the song and he makes it speak to people today is absolutely phenomenal. It floored me. And it set the tone for the entire show. It had me sitting upright, ready for whatever came next, as I got the message. We're all a little too comfortably numb, and we need to wake up. And art is supposed to be dangerous. This is the kind of art that is dangerous. This is not a drill. And apparently it's too much for Michael Smerconish to handle. And he longs for the days when Pink Floyd could just be this little chummy group going around doing drugs, playing shows, trying to keep it together in the early 70s, get along. And he doesn't like the messages that are being shared. And he certainly probably is revolted by at least half of the video images that are shown to people in attendance, which attack the military industrial complex, which go after Christian fascism. He's got a sheep now that goes through the audience. He always has the pig. The pig is a symbol of the rich fucking the poor, stealing from the poor. And I think, that's something that he's just, it's too much. It's too much for someone like Michael Smerconish. So that concludes this breakdown, going through the different parts of the interview, but really just showing the ease at which the CNN producers are able to take this and make it into something that can generate headlines. There's a clickbait progressive site called Raw Story. They generate clicks saying Roger defended Russia, but that's not true. Then you got other sites that are saying he was taking the pro-China line and he doesn't get the stakes for independence in Taiwan. That's not even the point. The point is, what is the role of the U.S. empire in the world? And that's never anything that anyone at CNN would like to discuss. Even the biggest rock stars, they are resistant to having that conversation. So thank you for coming to this stream, watching this stream, tuning in. As I say at the end of every show, I'm over at shadowproof.com. You can donate there. You can support independent journalism there. Of course, when we do the streams, we have super chats. So you can always have access like that if you enjoy this kind of a breakdown, takedown of propaganda. But also, the dissenter.org is a site where I curate a newsletter on whistleblowers covering national security issues, related press freedom issues. And there I do my updates and regular coverage of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's case. And so with that, I'll just do a check-in and see if there's anything else from all of you that I would like to react to. And thank you for being here to comment. We'll go back up to the top. I'll just put this up from earlier. Yeah. Dr. Strangelove is probably a lot closer to the reality than it should be. It is a rather strange crew in charge. Twisted. I agree. And then Jade Star says they want Roger to play the music and shut up. This world is archaic. And that's true. Salgado, it's his show. He worked his whole life for the ability to perform it. And then Liam, we want Julian Assange free now. Indeed, we do. And Salgado says that they've had the pig forever. The pig is a staple of Pink Floyd live shows, and I'm glad that Roger still has that in his show. And then and yes, I agree with the general sense that I think it backfired. I believe that Roger came off pretty well despite how they cut it, and pointed to the important aspects that are so often omitted from the narrative. And as much as they want to think they can control the narrative, with shows like this one and others who are able to speak up, with the way we're all able to engage with each other on social media, in spite of the censorship asserted by the Silicon Valley tech companies, we still are able to get a little bit closer to what is true and real every single day. And it may get harder and it may take work, but it's what we have to do. And so thank you for tuning in to this broadcast. I'll be back soon with another stream on the Shadowproof YouTube channel. Until then, you all take care of yourselves.